30 years into democracy, South Africa finds itself grappling with coalition politics, with deep inequality, allegations of state capture, rising public infrastructure, questions about whether the promise of liberation has been fulfilled. And in his new book, Promises and Peril, The South African Crisis, Dr. Imraan Buccus argues that our crisis is not simply political, economic, but also moral. We're going to be unpacking the diagnosis of South Africa today, perhaps more importantly, where he believes hope still lies. And he joins us virtually this morning for the book review segment. Dr. Buccus, a very good morning, and thank you for your time in the SABC at this hour.
Thank you, Liesl. Thanks for having me on your show.
I know it's a crucial time in our country, given that we're obviously edging closer to local government elections. And so putting thoughts to paper, why this book? Why now? I mean, the title immediately itself presents two competing ideas. There's hope, there's also danger. Talk to us a little bit more about your part memoir, part political commentary, and the call to action.
Yeah, let's go back to your question on morality, right? I think in '94, as a country, we enjoyed immense moral legitimacy. And we know that was rooted in struggle. It was a hugely intoxicating moment, '94. I think we earned the respect of the world. And the world was focused on South Africa, in terms of what we had accomplished. And we know the gravitas that the name Nelson Mandela had at that point. But I think 30, 32 years later, much of that has been destroyed. And, one doesn't need deep analysis for that. I think if you ask any South African, they would say to you that that legitimacy has been destroyed by the looting that we see in the country, by the capture of state institutions that intensified during the presidency of Jacob Zuma. And we're also seeing self-enrichment around us, right? There's a huge gap. I think well, not I think, but the largest gap in the world between wealthy and poor. And if one wants to become slightly theoretical about this, there's a political scientist, an analyst who in the 60s, Frans Fanon, wrote about this. He spoke about the emergence of a predatory elite that we have in post-colonial societies. So I think ultimately the point I'm making is that our legitimacy has been destroyed by the looting and the pillaging of the South African public purse.
You know, Dr. Buccus, I want to get into that because there's obviously the debate about liberation movements and their ability to govern in the continent. Was the demise of the ANC inevitable then at this point, because liberation movements in decline becomes one of the book's central arguments as well? Perhaps you can explore, liberation movements, how you argue they lose their moral compass once they become governing, once they come into governance.
Yeah, let's focus on the African continent. I think liberation movements across the African continent enjoy huge moral legitimacy when they come to power. But like we've spoken about previously on a different show, that moral legitimacy starts to wane 3, 4 decades into liberation. So what we see happening in South Africa with the ANC is not surprising at all. We've seen this with KANU in Kenya. We've seen this, in the Zambian context. We've seen this in multiple other contexts where corruption and infighting starts to destroy a liberation movement and they get pushed to the periphery. And I think as time goes on, the romance of these liberation movements die out. And when you talk to younger people in the country, for instance, older generations, perhaps my generation, will tend to romanticize the struggle. But when you talk to younger people today, they more or less make the point that yes, liberation was great. We know the contribution that many people made, but we can't go on talking about the liberation struggle because we remain without jobs. We want the potholes to be fixed and we want the street lights to work. You can't go on telling us about liberation 32 years later when we remain unemployed and on the periphery of South African society.
And Dr. Buccus, I just want to come in there because I want to look at the phenomenon in the global south as well. Many countries, succumb to notions of corruption despite the liberation struggles as well. Just to add to your point as well. And this is what you explore. And I wonder if you can speak to why so many of the liberation movements then begin to struggle with corruption in office as well. Lessons that South Africa could be learned. You see what's happening at the Madlanga Commission as well, and what's coming to the fore. These allegations involve organized crime as well. So listening to the testimonies, the evidence of what's coming through, it's painting that perilous picture.
Yeah, there's a whole range of things we can say there, Liesel, but let me try and break it down into just three main points. I think one is liberation movements by their very nature are both democratic and dictatorial. When liberation movements are in the underground, they're in exile, they often struggle to have deep democratic practice, right? Because you're underground, you're in exile, it comes with its own dynamics. Uh, and in that context, they also become dictatorial in a way that you can't always seek huge, contribution to what's going on. You make decisions, and those decisions need to be followed. And I think when a liberation movement comes into power, we do have not just one perspective to how liberation or how governance should take place. For example, you have an exile tradition in the ANC that might have a different perspective to governance, and you have an internal tradition that might see how governance should occur differently. That's the one. The second point is, one of the responsibilities in a post colonial, post apartheid society is to consolidate a black middle class. And we have a black middle class today of 5 to 7 million, dramatically different from the 300,000 we had in 94. So that's great. The black middle class has officially overtaken the white middle class. Significant yet insignificant in a country of majority black people. But why is this point important? Is that in trying to consolidate the black middle class, we've also seen that the approach has been linked to huge levels of corruption. We've also seen that how the state has become a facilitator of social mobility, which is fine. But when corruption enters the fray, and to the extent that it does, then I think, like we spoke about earlier, that attempt to correct the wrongs of the past becomes in a way morally corrupt. And the third is, and I don't think we've reached this point yet, that many liberation movements tend to have an uneasy relationship with the Constitution. We've seen, some rumblings about this, but it really becomes dangerous when, leaders start to argue that the Constitution is serving as an impediment to development and delivery.
And
And we've seen this in other contexts, but thankfully not yet to that extent in South Africa.
And so when we look at, just in conclusion, democracy, voter turnout, particularly in this election year, that continuous decline, young people increasingly, distrusting politics. Why does elections become so important now, so more than ever at this point as well, the future that we're looking into? Thankfully, you do say that there is some hope, but perhaps you can tell us a little bit more, given this juncture that we are navigating the dynamics to the 4th of November.
Yeah, I think we've seen from the Afrobarometer, we've seen from the work of Ben Roberts and others that the majority of people are disillusioned with democracy. Institutions of state trust in different spheres of government range from between 10 and 30%. And that's, of course, largely because the state has not delivered. The elections does offer us an opportunity for people to have their voices heard, but at the same time, it's not easy in a country of young people. More than 50% are under 35, and the vast majority of those are unemployed and desperately poor. It becomes really difficult to convince young people that they need to vote because very often the argument would be, why should I? Because, voting has not changed my life. But I think, as we look at the Madlanga Commission, as we look at the other commissions, I think they offer some hope, and that hope is that South Africa is doing, what it should to address the corruption. I think if we start to see prosecutions, that will certainly help. And I don't think all hope is lost. Two of the central pivots in our democracy, civil society and the
Yeah.
media, are doing really well. So I think that offers some hope. The commissions offer some hope. So I don't think all is lost.
Well, South Africa must find that exit point to a better future. Dr. Buccus, thank you for your time and for weighing in. So much to say, so little time, but this is the conversation starter. Your latest offering there, obviously in the book review segment, Promises and Peril, the South African Crisis. It's by Dr. Imraan Buccus. Again, thank you, team, for joining us this hour to unpack all this and more.